Thank you, Pastor Donnie, for reading the Word and for praying for us this morning. I trust your Bibles are still out, and if they are not, you can open them again to Joshua chapter 6, which will be where we're spending our time in God's Word this morning. If you're using the Bible in the seat back in front of you, you can find that on page 164 of the Old Testament. Joshua chapter 6. Well, it was a few years ago that Febreze, the company that makes air fresheners, ran an ad campaign that asked viewers the question, have you gone nose blind? And the ad campaign featured people in situations where they were around unpleasant smells, but because they had been around those unpleasant smells for so long, they no longer smelled them. Hence the idea of going nose blind. So for example, one of the commercials, you can find it on YouTube later, it's a teenage boy, he walks into his room, he takes off his sweaty gym socks and he throws them onto the bed, and on the bed there's an even bigger pile of sweaty gym socks, and then without a care in the world, he walks back over and he plops down on his beanbag and starts playing video games. And the commercial comes to a screeching halt, and the narrator says, yep, Jimmy's gone nose blind. And then this trendy mom comes in with the Febreze, and she's spraying it everywhere, and the smell goes away, and the socks go away, because they want to get you to buy the product. And look, as the youth pastor of this church, I can vouch for the reality of going nose blind. All I need is about 24 hours on a mission trip with your teenagers, and my sense of smell is gone. It is packed up and left the building. Well, when it comes to the Bible, I think Christians can experience a similar phenomenon. If you've been a Christian for a while and you're familiar with Scripture, there are some of those stories in here that we are just so familiar with and that we've heard so many times that it's like we've gone nose blind to them. We're just so familiar with them that we no longer notice that there's even here. And we think, oh yeah, I've heard that story before. I know how it ends. We read it and we move right along without giving it much thought. And it happens to all of us, myself included. And I would argue it has probably happened to our sermon text here this morning. Joshua chapter 6, the conquest of Jericho. It is arguably one of the most famous stories in our Bible, and if we're being honest, it might be a story that we have gone nose blind to. In fact, I think it's safe to say that once a Bible story has ended up as a VeggieTales episode, okay, you are safely in nose blind territory, right? So if your frame of reference for Joshua 6 is Josh and the Big Wall with talking vegetables and purple slushies, okay, buckle up, all right? We've got a big, long road ahead of us. So usually when we jump into sort of a one-off sermon or one-off sermon series like we are today and next Sunday, we kind of have to drink from a fire hydrant to get our bearings on where we are in the Bible. Normally I'd throw some dates at you, maybe put a timeline on the screen or give you an outline, and that kind of gets us to where we are in Joshua 6. But as I was studying this week, I realized that our story actually does that for us. Not with dates, not with timelines, not with outlines, but with themes. We read Joshua 6 just a moment ago, but this story actually begins in chapter 5, verse 13. So look up just a couple of verses from where you are in your Bible. Look at Joshua 5, verse 13 and on. And these few verses right here are the prologue of this story, and these verses are going to give us a framework for how we are to then understand what happens at Jericho. Okay, so let's read Joshua 5, 13 through 15. Now it came about when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries? He said, no. Rather, I indeed come now as captain of the host of the Lord. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, what has my Lord to say to his servant? The captain of the Lord's host said to Joshua, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Well, if you've read your Old Testament carefully, you might recognize a couple of things going on here. First, there's a man who seems to be an angel holding a sword in his hand. And he declares himself to be the commander of the army of the Lord, and then Joshua treats this angel, or this angelic being, as his superior. That's the other thing to note in verse 14. It's that Joshua bows before him and removes his sandals because this angel is declaring the ground as holy. Now, where have we seen these things before in the Bible? If the angel holding a sword sounds familiar to you, we've actually seen someone like this 2 times before in the Old Testament. The first one might be a little bit more familiar to you, coming to us from the Garden of Eden. Remember Genesis chapter 3? What happens? Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden, dwelling with God himself, but their sin causes them to be sent away from the presence of the Lord. And God, outside of the Garden of Eden, stations an angel with a flaming sword in his hand. And this angel is set there to keep humans from entering back into this holy garden to then pollute it with their sin. That's the first time we've seen an angel with a sword in his hand. The second time might be a little bit more obscure. It comes to us from Numbers chapter 22. And at this point in Israel's history, they have been delivered out of Egypt, and they're on their way to the Promised Land, but they've got some enemies along the way. And there is a pagan prophet named Balaam who has been hired to go cast a curse over Israel as they come near his land. And while Balaam is riding on his donkey to go and curse the people of Israel, do you remember what stops him in his tracks? An angel with a drawn sword in his hand. Now this time, this angel with a drawn sword is keeping the curse of evil away from God's holy people. And later on in this story, Balaam becomes overwhelmed by the Lord. He cannot speak this curse. He can only speak blessing over the Israelites. And at one point, as Balaam is blessing Israel, he calls them a garden like aloe trees planted by the Lord. And so right now, in Joshua chapter 5, we once again have an angel from the Lord with his sword drawn. But now, this time, this angel is not barring humans from going into holy places where they don't belong, but he is here to lead these people into a holy place where they belong. They are now going to be God's people, living in God's land, with God's holy presence, just like they once were in the Garden of Eden. And this angel with this drawn sword is here to show them God is the one leading this charge. And it's starting right there, right then, at Jericho. So this prologue is placing what God alone is about to do at Jericho directly downstream from everything God alone has done ever since the beginning. That despite human evil, despite human rebellion, God alone is making a way for his people to dwell with him again in his land under his good rule. And God alone is delivering on the promise he gave to Abraham a long time ago, that Abraham's offspring would be blessed, that they would become a great nation, and that through them, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. God alone is making all of this come true, starting right here in the book of Joshua. Brothers and sisters, does God keep his promises, or does God keep his promises? God is leading this charge. He is bringing them into this land. And this angelic messenger of the Lord's army, this angelic messenger is tying up all of these narrative strands and is now framing how we read the rest of the Jericho story. God is with his people. The ground on which they stand belongs to him, so now they are to enlist with God, rather than God merely enlisting with them. That's the point of the angel's response to Joshua's question. In verse 13, Joshua poses the question to this mysterious figure. Joshua asks this angel, he says, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And the angel's response is, "No, rather I indeed come now as captain of the host of the Lord." So notice that angel does not answer Joshua's question, but his non-answer is actually the real answer, because he's flipping this question back around to Joshua. It's not a case of whose side the Lord is on. It's a case of who is on the Lord's side. The question here is not, is God going to ally with Israel? No. The question is Israel going to ally with God? And though this is a small detail, I think this moment has large implications for our lives as Christians. This question should be a defining question in your life and in mine. Rather than just running headlong into life and making decisions and then backing up and asking, well, God, are you with me in this choice? Are you with me in this issue? Are you with me in this event? Are you with me in this relationship? We would do well to be patient and humbly submit ourselves to this question. Am I with God on this choice? Am I with God on this issue? Am I with God in this event in my life? Am I with God in this relationship? Let that be a filter question in your life this new year. Am I just living life the way that I please and occasionally checking over my shoulder and wondering if God is with me on something? Or am I living my life patiently and deliberately asking the question, am I with God in this? As we'll see in these two sermons ahead, God is going to deal with everybody in these two stories. He's going to deal with everybody on the basis of that question. Are they with him or are they against him? Are the Israelites and the Canaanites and the leaders and the followers, are they going to be with God or are they going to be against him? And as we'll see, there's going to be some surprises along the way. As we move into chapter 6, we see in verse 1, it says that Jericho is tightly shut because of the sons of Israel. Perhaps they had their own Paul Revere moment. There's a horseback rider who rides through and says, the Israelites are coming. The Israelites are coming. And what we find actually is if you go back and read Joshua chapter 2, a Canaanite woman by the name of Rahab, who we'll see in a minute, she confesses and says, we have heard about you. Our hearts melted and our courage left us when we heard about what your God did, bringing you out of Egypt and into this land. So what God has been doing for Israel to this point is breaking news all across the ancient world. They know what's going on here. And God is about to break some more news for them. In verse 2, the Lord says to Joshua, See, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and the valiant warriors. You shall march around the city, all the men of war, circling the city once. You shall do so for 6 days. And now it's probably about at this point, in verse 4, that you would expect instructions about siege ramps and wall breaching tactics to kind of make their way to the forefront. But like we read a moment ago, God has a different battle plan in mind. Verses 4 and 5, look who feature in his battle plan. Also, 7 priests shall carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. Then on the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And it shall be that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people will go up, every man straight ahead. So what's significant here is the who and the what. Who's here and what is involved. There's no mention of swords and siege ramps. It's priests and it's trumpets. But this is intentional on behalf of the Lord. We just saw a moment ago that this commander of the Lord's army appears to Joshua to show them that God is the one who is leading this campaign. And now God says to Joshua directly, he has already given Jericho into Israel's hands. Maybe you remember the Sunday school song, the kids' song, about Joshua and Jericho. Remember how it goes? Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls came a-tumbling down. All right? Okay, cute song, but that's not actually what's happening here. It's God who is fighting the battle of Jericho. Israel is not gaining this promised land by their cunning or their intrigue or their might or their good works. They were gaining the promised land because God was fighting for them. That is why they were gaining this land. What we're supposed to see is that all of this going on looks a lot less like lines drawn for battle. This looks more like the liturgy of a worship service. By worshiping God, by obeying God, by holding God up as supreme in their midst, that's how Israel was going to experience victory. That's why all of the things of God here are so prominently featured. The Ark of the Covenant. That's like the hot spot of God's presence. Where the Ark is, God is as well. The priests, they were the religious leaders. They weren't the military leaders. Yet they were the ones who were leading this processional. The trumpets that are featured here. For Israel, trumpets were just as much instruments of worship as they were of warfare. When Israel encountered God at Mount Sinai, do you remember what they heard? They heard the blast of a trumpet. And that was signifying that God was there in their midst. The march around Jericho was not just God's people going to war. This was God's people going to worship and to celebrate that God has already given them this victory. And brothers and sisters, isn't that why we gather every Sunday? Isn't that why we're here? To celebrate and worship God, that He has already given us the victory in Christ. That He has given us victory over sin. He has given us victory over death. He has given us the victory of eternal life. That's why we gather together and we worship the victory that God has already given us. Not what you and I can manage on our own. It's this certainty of victory that we see bookending these opening instructions. God tells Joshua in verse 2, he says, "See, I have given Jericho into your hand." Verse 5, God says, "The wall of the city will fall down flat." God is telling Joshua, this thing is over before it has even begun. Victory is already guaranteed. And friends, I think that is such a heartening reality, to understand that about who our God is. That the only person in existence who can fully and completely and irrevocably guarantee an outcome is our God. Humans cannot guarantee outcomes. Politicians cannot guarantee outcomes. CEOs cannot guarantee outcomes. Financial advisors cannot guarantee outcomes. Your doctor cannot guarantee outcomes. But the one true living God, He guarantees outcomes. And He is our God. And the guaranteed outcomes for us as His people is that His guaranteed outcomes are always for our good. They're always for our good. And this is such good news because our world just desperately grasps at the future, trying to grab some sort of guaranteed outcome. But we have it with our God. Faithful Christian and Holocaust survivor Corrie ten Boom once said, "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God." It's exactly what Israel was supposed to do here. That's exactly what you and I should do. You might feel like you're an Israelite staring up at the walls of Jericho this year. The year ahead of you might feel like it's looming, like it's imposing, like it's uncertain. These might be the words that describe your life right now. But friends, our God comes to us with good promise after good promise after good promise that He will always fulfill and that are always for our good. And our God says to us, like He said to Joshua, "I know how this is going to end." Friends, we trust in that God. That is our God this morning. If you want to be victorious in life this year, if you want to experience victory in 2023, you know what you should do? Worship God. Worship Him. Do that first. Prioritize that first. Be here first. And then watch how God goes before you this year and takes care of all of those things. Joshua obeys, and they go forward with this plan. Verses 6 through 14 keep this worship front and center. You have the Ark of the Covenant, the priests, the trumpets, the people silently marching. It's all a daily reminder. God is with them. God is leading them. God is going to deliver this victory for them. And they host this worship parade once a day, each day, for 6 days. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. Ark, priests, trumpets, marching. Ark, priests, trumpets, marching. If you're getting tired of hearing me say that, okay, imagine you're the Israelites. I mean, that is what you're doing all day for 6 days. But that now gives way to the 7th day in verse 15. Some new instructions are given. After the 7th lap around the city, on the 7th day, people are now to shout, and the trumpets blow, and verse 17 gives us a new and unusual but very important phrase. Verse 17 says, "The city shall be under the ban. It and all that is in it belongs to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot and all who are with her in the house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. And as for you, only keep yourselves from the things under the ban, so that you do not covet them and take some of the things under the ban, and make the camp of Israel accursed, and bring trouble on it. Let all the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. So we're told Jericho is to be put, quote, under the ban. Your version might say devoted to destruction or doomed to destruction. Every accursed thing must be destroyed. Okay, this phrase, under the ban, it's just one word in the original Hebrew. It is the word herem. And that word first comes to us back in Deuteronomy chapter 7. And that is where God told the Israelites that they were to completely and totally eliminate the Canaanites. So Israel is under the command to not let any living thing within this city survive. And nor are they to take any spoils for themselves. That is under the ban. And put a pin in that idea, okay? We're going to talk about it here, but we're going to come back to this again next week. That's going to be a really important idea for where we're going, okay? But for now, we have to deal with this. This is a troubling thing to consider, that God would order the complete destruction of a people group. Much ink has been spilled and volumes have been written on this issue by men and women who are much smarter than me, and they have much more time than I do. A couple weeks ago, in your bulletin, you might have read Pastor Tyler write an insert about this issue when he was dealing with this issue in 1 Samuel. And we'd be happy to put another copy of that in your hand if you're curious for further reading. But specifically just for Joshua 7, okay, let me try to explain the ban. Let me frame it like this. At the beginning of our time this morning, we read about this angelic commander of the Lord who encounters Joshua. And he tells Joshua, remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. So this physical land was to be set apart for God's holy dwelling place with God's holy people. This was to be like a new Garden of Eden. But currently residing in this land were people who were terribly and utterly evil. And they were polluting the creation of God with their sin. It's like this land was radioactive with sin, with evil. Now, if you go stand somewhere that is radioactive for long enough, what's going to happen? You're going to get sick, and you quite possibly might die. Well, the same goes for God's people. If they stayed in this sinfully radioactive land, they were going to be at risk for being contaminated with this wickedness and this idolatry. And the only thing that can decontaminate this land is the white-hot presence of a holy God living among his holy people. What went wrong in the Garden of Eden? Humans polluted the perfect creation of God with sin, and they were banished from his presence. But now, right here in Joshua 6, this is starting to be undone. God is establishing a beachhead here. Jericho was supposed to be D-Day for God. It's where God, with one great, divinely executed push and with the victorious blast of the trumpet, it's where God was going to gain a foothold on earth. And his presence would begin to go forward with his people, where he could reclaim creation, where he could dwell once again in holiness with his holy people. And this was not just so that God could go play favorites with the Israelites, that they were his little pets. No, God was doing this starting with the Israelites so that Isaiah 45 verse 22 might come true, where the Lord says, "Turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, For I am God, and there is no other. So this plan, this global, cosmic, redemptive plan was going to require nothing less than the full eradication of anyone who rejected the one true God. This is a hard mandate, but it is a just mandate. And that is what happens in verses 20 through 21. Verse 20 says, "The people shouted, and priests blew the trumpets. And when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight ahead, and they took the city. They utterly destroyed everything in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and donkey, with the edge of the sword." Before we point the finger at God for this, we have to point the finger at ourselves first. See, as Christians, we believe that when God created this world, He created it as a perfect place, a holy place where He could dwell with us, with no stain of sin, with no stain of death. But starting with Adam and Eve and continuing all the way until 2023, right here, as you and I sit in this room, humans have polluted this world with sin. And it doesn't take long watching the news to see that. It doesn't take long scrolling social media to see that. And if you're honest with yourself, you might not have to think very far back in the recesses of your mind to think about the last time you've done something wrong, or you have hurt someone needlessly. Our world is radioactive with sin because of humanity as a whole and because of us as individuals. I mean, we have taken this world that God once called good and spoke blessing over, and we have defaced it with sin. And as such, the only way for a holy God to deal with us is to put us under the ban too. At the end of our Bibles, in the book of Revelation, God gives us a glimpse of this future judgment that is coming for all who reject Him. And if you've read Revelation, you'll know that these judgments are symbolized by many things, and the imagery is many things. But one of the ways Revelation speaks about judgment is with the imagery of trumpets. Trumpets will be blown as God pours out justice upon those who reject Him. And unless something or someone intervenes on behalf of you or I, we are going to find ourselves like the people of Jericho, huddled against the city walls, with the ear-piercing sounds of trumpets with no escape, because God has come for us. Friend, if you don't know this, if you don't know this God, I plead with you to hear these words this morning. Do not close your heart off to this like the gates of Jericho. God is clear. It is appointed unto man to die once and then face judgment. The judgment of God is coming against all people, like it did at Jericho. And there is only one way to escape. And that's what we see at the end of our story. Verses 22 through 25. Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, "Go into the harlot's house and bring the woman and all she has out of there, as you have sworn to her." So the young men who were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brothers and all she had. They also brought out all her relatives and placed them outside the camp of Israel. They burned the city with fire, and all that was in it. Only the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. However, Rahab the harlot and her father's household and all she had, Joshua spared. And she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day, for she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Remember that we noted earlier, God is going to deal with everyone in this story on the basis of one question. Are they with God or are they against Him? Are the Israelites and the Canaanites and the leaders and the followers, are they with God or are they against Him? And here is our first test case. Rahab, the Canaanite harlot. I mean, think about it. If anyone was going to be the first to die at this moment, it was the unclean sinners huddled around the city wall. But amidst this desolation of Jericho, we find something utterly shocking. A faithful Canaanite woman and her family are exempted from the ban by faith in God and by their allegiance to Him. If you go back and you read Joshua chapter 2, Rahab tells the Israelite spies who came to her earlier. She says to them, I know that the Lord your God has given you this land. For the Lord your God, He is God alone in heaven and on earth. That confession of faith is astounding. She is confessing that she is for God in a city that is against Him. Friends, the implication of this moment right here is radical. I cannot overstate how important how important things are going on here. That if anyone who professes their faith and faithfulness to God, they not only escape the ban of God's judgment, but they can find themselves now on the other side as counted among the people of God. Rahab the sinner becomes Rahab the saved by her faith in the Lord. Friends, this is the good news that we as Christians proclaim. This is the way of escape. That just as a few sinners have the ban of God pass over them at Jericho and they find salvation on the other side, so the ban of God has fallen upon Jesus on the cross in our place, so that by our most desperate and feeble confession of faith that Jesus is God in heaven above and on earth below, the ban of God might pass over us, and that we may find salvation and find ourselves pitching our tents with God and with His people on the other side. Imagine verse 25. The Israelites with this peculiar woman and her family living among them the rest of their days as a living monument to the mercy and the salvation of our Lord. Friends, that is who we are, each one of us. We are great sinners who have lived in the rebellious cities of this earth. But we are great sinners who have found a great salvation in Christ. He is the one who has taken the ban for us. He is the one who is the King of God's kingdom coming into this world. And one day that kingdom will come. That kingdom will come. Heralded just like it did at Jericho, by the sound of a trumpet. That last day, the trumpet will sound. And to the enemies of God, it will be the sound of war. That day will be a fearful day, a dreadful day, a day of no escape from the judgment of God. But to the people of God who have cried out in faith in these fleeting cities here on earth, the sound of this final trumpet will be one of victory. It'll be one of peace. It'll be one of resurrection, because our God has now come for us. In Revelation, when the seventh and final trumpet blasts, chapter 11, verse 15 says that there were loud voices in heaven saying, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever." The story of Jericho is a foretaste of that. It's a preview of that day. That by faith we escape the judgment of our world. By faith we will one day enter into a new creation. By faith we will enjoy a new Garden of Eden. By faith we will take a new kingdom one day. A kingdom where Jesus will reign forever and ever. May we be found as the faithful people of God until then. Let's close in prayer. God, we worship you. We give you the glory for your word this morning. At Jericho, we see a picture of your hand of justice against our sin, Lord, and we tremble. Yet, Lord, at Jericho, we also see your hand of salvation, and we rejoice. Lord, let us see your victory in our lives this year, not by our own hand, not for our own glory, but Lord, let us see your victory by worshiping you, our God, who has gone before us in all things. Lord, may your Spirit make us a people who trust you now more than we've ever trusted you before. And may you show yourself to be faithful to us more now than ever before. We pray these things in the name of our Lord Jesus. Amen.